The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, we'll just get started in a couple minutes. Hi everyone, thanks for joining so far. We're just going to give it another couple minutes. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Lenny Kolstad and I'm a Senior Program Associate on the Market Engagement Team at the Institute for Market Transformation, or IMT. We're a national nonprofit based in DC that promotes energy efficiency in buildings. And today we're going to be talking for an hour about green property condition assessments. So this is the third webinar in a IMT series of webinars focused on high-performance buildings. I presented alongside Nick Stellatis of TIAA on investing in high-performance buildings. And I also presented with Tim Rundy, an appraiser with Rundy and Partners, on valuing high-performance buildings. Those were our first two webinars. If you weren't able to join those webinars and would like to see the slides, please email me. My email address will be available at the end of my slideshow today, so you can see those. And today is our third and final webinar focused on green property condition assessments. So I'll be leading us off. I'll be describing a current IMT project focused on the commercial mortgage process and specifically how building energy information can be integrated into that process. Then Glenn Adams, Vice President of Energy Services with AEI Consultants, will talk about their energy assessment process and how the energy assessment can be integrated with the property condition assessment. And then Becca Rushin, Vice President of Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility with Jamestown, will talk about their program, Jamestown Green, with a specific focus on their PCA process. After we present, we'll have a few minutes, about 15 minutes probably available for Q&A. So if you do have questions, please type them into the chat box in the webinar console. So over the past year or so, IMT has worked with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and the University of California, Berkeley on a project focused on the commercial mortgage process and how building energy information can be factored in. The commercial mortgage process is enormous, with almost $500 billion of deals originated in 2015. But up to this point, it hasn't been leveraged as an opportunity to finance energy efficiency in commercial buildings. So our project team, and this is a Department of Energy supported project, is seeking to answer the question, what role can the commercial mortgage process play in driving investments in energy efficiency? So phase one of the project began last fall and concluded this spring. We conducted a review of existing studies related to this topic. We then had multiple discussions with important stakeholders such as owners, lenders, energy service providers, and advocates. And based on those discussions and the literature review, we conducted a scoping report which provided a few recommendations for potential interventions. This link here is to the scoping report, and I'll send out the slides at the end of the webinar, so you'll have the scoping report available to you. So phase two of the project is currently ongoing, and the scoping report identified a few potential interventions. One is demonstrating to lenders why and when energy factors move the needle related to bank underwriting. The second, developing energy efficiency requirements for property condition assessments. And finally, including energy metrics in Argus, which is a very popular commercial real estate software. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into the second intervention focused on the PCA. So why are we looking at the property condition assessment? For one, it's typically a required due diligence item during the commercial mortgage process. And how it works is PCA firms will be hired to analyze key building systems and provide an estimate of future costs for maintaining and replacing those systems. At this point, on the commercial side, energy assessment is not included in the PCA. Although PCA firms do have engineers on staff, so conducting the energy assessment doesn't seem like it would be too big of a technical reach for these PCA firms. And in fact, some PCA firms do provide energy assessments, just not directly related to the PCA. So there are some challenges with this, with potential interventions. One is that the PCA must be completed relatively quickly, usually a 2 to 3 week time frame. So conducting the energy assessment on top of a traditional PCA scope can be difficult within that time frame. And the PCA generally occurs late in the commercial mortgage process, so it has a limited ability to influence bank underwriting and the appraisal process. So we've had a few conversations with PCA firms, and we've come up with a few potential options for increasing the presence of building energy information within the PCA process. So this first option you can see here assumes that a potential buyer is interested in receiving additional mortgage proceeds to pay for energy improvements. So in this case, a buyer would request that a PCA firm conduct a detailed energy audit that would include projected energy cost savings. And ideally, a lender would then see that report and agree to offer additional mortgage proceeds to pay for the energy improvements. This is a good option in the sense that it leads rather directly to energy improvements and potential energy and carbon savings, but I think it will be a challenge to get lenders to take into consideration this building energy information and agree to offer additional proceeds. So option 2 assumes that a buyer is interested in receiving a lower commercial mortgage interest rate. So in this case, a buyer would request that a PCA firm conduct the ASTM Building Energy Performance Assessment, or BEPA, which is a methodology for collecting, analyzing, and reporting building energy information. If this report shows that a building is performing well from an energy standpoint, ideally a lender would recognize that good energy performance means lower lender risk and be willing to provide a lower mortgage interest rate to the buyer. And our third option is focused on price negotiations. In this scenario, a buyer would request a PCA firm to provide just basic building energy information. Perhaps it's energy benchmarking data. And if this information shows that the building is a poor performer, the buyer can then request the PCA firm to conduct an ASHRAE Level 1 audit, which will have a high-level overview of the cost to make the improvements and to make the building more efficient. And the buyer can then use this information to negotiate the purchase price of the property. So I want to just emphasize that these are preliminary options, and we're still seeking, the project team is still seeking feedback from stakeholders, in particular lenders and potential commercial property buyers, as to the feasibility of these options and how we can tweak them. Ideally, we'd like to design a pilot program next year, perhaps based on variations of these options. So thank you for your time. My email address is shown here if you would like to see the slides from the first couple webinars, or if you have any specific feedback on these proposed interventions I just mentioned. I'd love to hear it. And if you'd like to learn more about IMT, you can visit our website at imt.org. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Glenn Adams with AEI Consultants. All right, Glenn, you should have controls now. Can anybody hear? Glenn, is it possible you're on mute?
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Can everybody see my slide? Can you see my slides, Lenny?
I can, yep.
Okay, good. My name is Glenn Adams with AEI Consultants. AEI Consultants is a due diligence firm, but we also perform energy assessments, and we perform what we call green PCAs, green P&As that actually incorporate the energy assessments into the property condition assessments. Our services will incorporate all three options that Lenny mentioned earlier, and I'm going to go through the processes, the advantages, the disadvantages of performing these assessments, and see if we can start a dialogue concerning why would I want to, as a lender, a buyer, a seller, why would I want to get involved in energy and property condition assessments. Okay, on the first slide, there are incentives for combining energy assessments with property condition assessments. For lenders, it could affect the collateral. If a property is significantly underperforming in energy use, it may affect the marketability. The property may not be sellable or leasable. So it might have a high vacancy rate because tenants are getting energy conservation wise, I like to say. They want to look at properties when they renew their leases. They want to look at the utility consumption. They want to look at the bills, the utility bills, and they want to get the best deal for the biggest bang for their buck, so to speak. If it's a low energy producer, it could impact the loan-to-value ratio. It's very similar to purchasing a property that would have to, where you would have to infuse a lot of capital in it after you purchased it or after you made a loan on it, and that could affect that loan. And it could impact the borrower's ability to repay a loan. If a borrower cannot lease his property because it is a low performer and he can't find tenants, then he may not be able to repay the loan. As far as buyers and owners, there are tax credits for energy improvements. There are many incentives from rebates and incentives for making energy improvements. There are programs out there that will allow you to purchase your equipment over time and pay for that equipment upgrades with the energy savings if you upgrade to energy improved equipment. So there's lots of incentives, not to mention that it would lower the carbon footprint, which would help many municipalities with their goals. It would boost jobs. It boosts jobs, cut pollution, and it advances energy conservation. In many states, many local municipalities are requiring a lot of these energy conservation type of assessments, especially what we call benchmarking, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. One thing that I found interesting, and this was from a fairly older data, is that every dollar saved, every dollar spent on energy improvement yields $6 in savings on energy conservation, which is really quite impressive. So when we have to replace that boiler, we can save not only on energy, but we can also get a lot of rebates, and we get a lot of incentives for replacing that boiler with a high efficiency boiler, and we save a lot of money. The EPA published this statement about 3 to 4 years ago, and they did a study with a lot of buildings that they have in their inventory, and they figured out that annual energy costs for commercial buildings exceed $100 billion, and 30% of energy in buildings is used inefficiently or unnecessarily. So in other words, you could take 30% of your utility bill and save it by making some low-cost, no-cost energy upgrades, energy conservation measures. The EPA projects that $20 billion in annual savings could be realized if energy efficiencies in industrial and commercial building was improved by 10%. What we are noticing in the industry, not only by recommending and calculating and modeling and analyzing these savings, we're seeing that 10% is readily achievable, and we're seeing savings up in the 30, 40, and 50% range. That means annual utility bills are being reduced as much as 50% or more just by making some either low cost, no cost, or investing in some renewable energy sources. If your building earns the Energy Star label, not only does it make it more marketable, but it actually saves a lot of money over the long run. For instance, this slide was put together back in 2004, and it was based on the Environmental Protection Agency's database of buildings, and they did it by region, and they did it by the United States. And they figured out that the Energy Star label buildings that scored 75 or above in Energy Star Portfolio Manager could save up to 75 cents per square foot, or up to 90 cents, I guess was the highest in the West North Central. 90 cents per square foot per year. That's how much energy savings they could realize. So it varies by type of building and that sort of thing, but it's worth it's worth looking into. Now, when we discuss energy assessments and what type of what do we need to do to actually, when we do a PCA, how can we integrate the energy assessments? Well, there's 3 levels, and these are defined by ASHRAE. And many PCA firms, like Lenny mentioned earlier, perform these different levels. The level 1 is an ASHRAE level 1, which is like a 30,000 foot view, a high altitude view of your energy, low cost, no cost, fly by the seat budget numbers. The level 2 is a little more detail, and the level 3 is your investment grade energy audit, where you actually have to go in and model the property, model the components and the systems to determine the savings. The first step in energy audits and incorporating energy audits into the PCA is to analyze the building energy use compared to similar buildings. The ASHRAE calls this the Preliminary Energy Assessment, or the PEA. Industry often refers to it as benchmarking, establishing a baseline. Where do we start? Now we can track it. Now we can see whether or not we're making improvements or whether or not we're getting worse, we're losing money. Government agencies call this a baseline utility analysis. It's establishing that baseline. How much energy is my property using, and how can I track that, and how can I determine if I can save money? In order to establish this baseline, the building owner must provide a minimum of 1 year, preferably 3 years, of utility bills for all of the energy uses at the property. And all of these sources of energy consumption at the property must be provided, as well as water usage, because even though water is not directly tied to energy savings, it's indirectly tied to energy savings because it takes energy to heat domestic water. It takes energy to heat heating water for hydronic systems. So gather all of your utility bills, your water usage, and we look at all of the consumption of all the sources of energy at the property. Now, as far as benchmarking, there are several programs that we can use. Usually, we take this utility data and we put it into EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager program. It's an online computer program provided by the EPA, written by the EPA, and they actually compare your building to buildings in their database. There are other proprietary benchmarking programs out there that compare your data to a proprietary database, which is a lot larger than EPA's database. Most energy conservation people, when they're looking at a PCA and integrating this preliminary baseline assessment, most companies out there use EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager because it doesn't cost anything. It was funded by the EPA, and it's available to anyone that owns property. Once this information, this raw data is input into Energy Star Portfolio Manager, then the overall energy use intensity, in other words, they calculate how much energy expressed in kBTU, British thermal units, 1,000 British thermal units per square foot per year. So it takes gas in therms, it takes electricity in kilowatt hours, and it takes all of the different units of measurement, and it converts it to a common measurement. Then it normalizes these calculations based on the annual climate condition at the property's location. And so that way you can compare an office building of a 100,000 square foot office building in Florida to a 100,000 square foot office building in Minnesota. So it normalizes that so that the comparisons are apples to apples. Now, this first step, the PEA or the baseline, is the value that we're looking at, and we compare it to other buildings. Energy Star Portfolio Manager has a scale of 1 to 100. If your building is at the median, 50, then 50% of the buildings in their database outperform yours, and you outperform 50%. If your building is at 75, that means only 25% of the buildings in EPA's database outperform yours for that type of building and that type of use, and you outperform 75%. Then you are eligible for the Energy Star certification label. If you're below the 50, then that means your building is actually less efficient than most buildings. We see a lot of buildings when we perform this baseline analysis. We see a lot of buildings in the 30 to 35% score, which surprises a lot of building owners because they think they're doing everything right and they think their buildings are very efficient. This EUI is used as a base tracking improvement, so you can keep adding your utility bills and you can keep tracking the score or the usage to see if your improvements are working, or if they're not working, or if they're working as good as you anticipated. So if someone calculates, does some energy calculations and say, okay, you can save 30% of your utility bills if you implement these energy conservation measures. Change the LED light bulbs, go to high efficiency HVAC equipment, change the windows to Energy Star rated, change your appliances, add insulation in the roof and things like that. Change your building envelope. If you do this, you can actually calculate what you would expect to save, but if you track it, you can actually see if that works. And one thing I want to note is that this preliminary energy analysis, this benchmarking, is not an energy audit, but it's included in the energy audit process, and it's actually necessary to complete the energy audit. If you don't start with the baseline, then an energy audit really is not very useful to you. This preliminary energy analysis is also being required by many states, counties, and municipalities. The state of California requires for every transaction that the building energy use disclosure report be provided. In other words, this baseline of energy in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, a score and a baseline usage must be provided to the lender and to the borrower. If someone is purchasing a property for any type of transaction, it must be provided to the purchaser. So a lot of purchasers are being surprised by the numbers that they're seeing. This is law in Washington, a lot of municipalities, Montgomery County, Maryland, a lot of municipalities and counties and states are starting to require this baseline analysis. It's also useful for lenders and buyers to determine whether or not the property that you're lending on or the property you're buying is how it compares to others. Is it an underperformer as far as energy conservation? Is it a high producer? Is it a good one? Is it eligible for certification under Energy Star program? So a lot of good things can come from this preliminary energy analysis, which is again, that's the basis and the first step in an energy analysis. Now, when we talk about integrating these assessments with the property condition assessments, the second step after the PEA is determine the level of assessment. Now, Lenny mentioned earlier that there are different options and different levels. The first option is the ASHRAE Level 1 energy audit, and this is defined by ASHRAE. So it's the association, it's the Heating and Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers Association. And so it includes the PEA. Like we said, the PEA is included in all energy audit levels. It requires a limited on-site survey of the building. You have to go in and look at what's there to determine how you can recommend improvements. It can be performed in conjunction with a PCA on-site survey, and it provides valuable information for buyers to determine the energy efficiency of a facility. The survey is generally performed by the field observer that performs the PCA. So the architect or engineer that performs the PCA can also create or fill out a checklist that can be analyzed by the energy consultant that can determine the energy efficiency of the building. The Level 1 identifies and provides a savings and cost analysis of low cost to no cost measures. It provides a listing of potential capital improvements that merit further consideration, and an initial judgment of potential costs and savings. So if you go in and upgrade this, we can say, okay, here's a ballpark figure. You put in $14,000 and you should save 5% of your energy bills. So it gives you that ballpark figure. Now, it's useful for lenders and buyers to determine not only where the energy efficiency is compared to, but it also gives you a roadmap for what you should do with that building. How can you improve? What are some simple steps or some next steps to improving the energy efficiency of your property? The next step is you may want to go with a more detailed energy audit, the ASHRAE Level 2. Now, this survey is performed by a certified energy specialist or engineer, and it provides cost savings, cost analysis, energy conservation measures, economic criteria, discussion of changes to operation and maintenance procedures. So it's more in depth than the Level 1, obviously. So it gives you a lot more information. It gives you a list of energy conservation measures, potential capital intensive improvements that require more thorough data collection and engineering analysis, and it gives you costs and savings. It provides those conservation measures, cost savings, simple payback, value in years, savings to investment ratios, and return on investments for each energy conservation measure. So this would be ideal for someone that was serious about not only purchasing a property, but actually improving the energy. This also gives you an idea of what rebates are out there, where to go look for them, where to find different incentives and different types of cost-saving measures. It's suitable for building owners and buyers who want to determine practical ways to improve the energy efficiency of their building. And so that basically is the end of my presentation. Lenny, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Glenn. And now, Becca, you should have controls.
Yep, I think I just took controls. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Becca Rushin with Jamestown Properties. I'm Vice President of Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility. The slides that I'm using today are slides that I originally created for a similar presentation at the Better Building Summit. On that panel, I was with an asset manager and a director of engineering, and so today it's nice to be co-presenting with the consultant perspective. Just to keep myself on track, here's a quick summary of the topics that I'm going to cover today. but I only have 7 or so slides, so I will go ahead and dig into those. I also know, you guys are involved with this as well, so please feel free to chime in with questions in the chat, and I think, as Lenny mentioned, we'll have some time for that at the end of the presentation. Just a little bit about Jamestown. We're a full-service, vertically integrated real estate operator. We've got about $11.1 billion in assets under management, so we're a bit boutique-y as a company with 200 or so professionals in New York. We're headquartered in Atlanta, but also have offices in New York, San Francisco, and Boston, and about 42 professionals that are located in Germany and 2 in Latin America. We have a pretty neat portfolio as far as I'm concerned. The building shown in the photo here is 1 Times Square. It's one of the assets that we own, and as you can imagine, a building with no windows that's covered in signs presents some unique challenges for benchmarking and energy efficiency. Just wanted to talk a little bit about our sustainability program. Really my perspective is from the program management approach. Jamestown Green is our internal proprietary program where we address sustainability at all levels, property, portfolio, and the corporate level. It was formalized in 2012, and really that had to do with the focus of our company. At that time, we were really focused on sustainable development, the sustainable development of properties. However, really kind of in late 2012 and 2013, we began to take a more serious and closer look at our operating assets. We are involved from the pre-acquisition due diligence phase to the disposition stage of our life cycle. And we have some internal branding, which you can see over on the right, that kind of describes the 4 program areas that we really work within. The drivers for all of this are probably familiar to those listening in. Cost savings, our desire and commitment to reduce our environmental impact, investor expectations and reporting standards, regulatory compliance, and tenant demands and expectations. Really as a program manager, my goal and my job, as I see it, is to overlay and leverage all of these drivers so that I can lower the barriers for the folks on the ground and motivate the property teams to get projects implemented during our hold period. In terms of just some high-level statistics, it's all about the data, and so I currently work on about 37 assets that I oversee from a sustainability perspective. We started really with our office and mixed use, but over time have really been able to get involved with more of our retail assets, especially where a regulatory environment or a law might support something like benchmarking. In terms of the assets that I don't work on, there are some major redevelopment projects and other properties where we can't benchmark right now, or we can't throw an ENERGY STAR score even if we do enter the data. But currently we've got over 13 million square feet benchmarked, and at least 11 of those are ENERGY STAR certified buildings. We also use the LEED rating system. We're not as LEED focused as some owners are, and that's mainly because we have a number of assets that aren't eligible for LEED certification. The same for ENERGY STAR, and so we might not be able to get a LEED plaque or an ENERGY STAR score, but we can still benchmark and track this information and use an EUI index instead. That said, LEED is a good roadmap for us, and we use it where we can. GRESB is the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark for those of you that aren't familiar with that term. We respond to GRESB, and we have since 2013, and over the years we've ranked well, and in last year's response we were ranked number 3 in our peer group and in the top 25% across all GRESB ranked portfolios. This is really important, and ultimately everything that we do as part of acquisitions and due diligence, we report on that to GRES. And so, in some ways, I've heard that some people look at reporting as kind of checking a box. In my opinion, is actually that reporting such as GRES and other types of third-party certifications, those can be a great roadmap, and that's part of my strategy as well. What you see on the left is an infographic of our environmental management system, which we formalized in 2013. And everything that you see here, these are things that we're thinking about, even early on in the deal process. We're also revisiting and revising these standards each year, just because sustainability and efficiency is a moving target. It's all relative, and it's a very dynamic part of the industry with best practices that are constantly emerging. Just in terms of process, I think every real estate company probably has a similar type of acquisitions process, but for us, it really starts with a pipeline list. Personally, it's my favorite document in the company. I think it's the most interesting. I like knowing what we're looking at. And for me, it gives me the ability to go ahead and start gathering some preliminary information. I'm a heavy user of GBIG, the Green Building Information Gateway. And even if we're just starting to look at a property, I can go on and pull some basic information off of GBIG and see, for example, if they've pursued certification in the past, if they've been submitting their required local law data, and I find that very helpful. Once this formal due diligence period kicks off, I'm typically invited to join an interdisciplinary team, and that's where I really kind of start trying to understand what our strategy is. Is this a full, redevelopment, repositioning? Is this more of a facelift, or are we really just buying and not doing much, not planning on doing much? In terms of the document request, I think what Glenn was talking about and what Glenn was describing, that's exactly the kind of information that I'm typically after. Energy Star certifications, access, even if it's read-only to the Energy Star account, that's what I'm typically looking for first, as well as any audit reports or previously completed PCAs. I actually have found a great deal of information that was just already existing that I've been able to get my hands on, that doesn't require extra investigation. If we are, when we order our own PCA, I'll usually get with the team and help them review and refine the scope. For example, are we really just looking at energy, or is it worth looking at water fixtures? It really just depends on the deal. And once that PCA is completed, we have multiple departments, the property managers, engineering, construction, everyone kind of is taking a look at it. And, in my opinion, I feel like I'm always bouncing somewhere between the 300 feet and the 30,000-foot view. But really, I let them kind of handle the nitty-gritty details, and I try and kind of extract a high-level strategy based on the information that I see in the PCA, and coordinate with them on those details where appropriate. We wrap up the acquisition process with a transaction kickoff meeting, and that's really, we have a transaction kickoff meeting, and then after the deal is complete, that's when we have our transition meeting. And the transition meeting is really my opportunity to memorialize our strategy with the asset management and property management team, and talk about anything interesting that we found during the process, or any questions I have for them. I feel like because we have been working on this for a few years, our issues have evolved over those years. It's been kind of a constant refinement process. And when I first started in 2012, it was really just difficult to identify, when to engage, who do we engage with. We have very short due diligence period and timing, and we don't want to overwhelm, we don't want to distract, but we were finding that we were either too early and people weren't ready to hear from us yet, or we were too late and the ship had already sailed. In 2013, that's where we were really establishing a workflow, and so then we had a consistent report and a format for a sustainability plan for all of our assets, but it was too time consuming and way too much detail. We want the properties to be engaged, and no one was reading these very long reports. And so that's also where we started our own portfolio-wide reporting. That's when we started responding to GRES, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, and really we decided, how can we make this relevant information more clear for the end user. And that's when we started, for example, incorporating a specific energy section into some of our PCAs. In 14, that's, I think as Glenn mentioned, there's a number of local laws and state laws that have emerged in the last few years. There's also new certification programs and other drivers for these sustainability projects. So it was a good opportunity just to sync up on that. An example would be a local law requiring benchmarking and disclosure. What does that mean for the acquisition and due diligence process? Should we have this information available? Is the seller providing it? If they're not, what can we do to get it? Last year, we were really focused on, what does the asset manager and property manager need and when. We aimed to give them something that was digestible, but also very informative. And so we use an onboarding checklist that we're always refining, and that really has served as a good kind of quick at-a-glance reference for the team. And now we're really, we've recently revisited these transition templates, and I've worked with our consultants, Verdani partners, who support me on my sustainability program management. I've worked with them on updating our sustainability and due diligence for new acquisitions policy. And my goal is to really just kind of further standardize the type of information that we're getting and make it easier for our acquisitions team to engage with the third-party firms to complete this analysis. We found a few strategies that have worked for us. I mentioned the deal checklist. The most important thing there has been for it to be consistent and centralized. That it's something that our team uses for every single deal. So if it's on the checklist, it gets done, basically. I think there's certain kind of levels of detail that could cause confusion. For example, not every city has a benchmarking policy, and certain lead buildings might have additional information that we might want to ask for. And so that's something that I coordinate closely with our acquisitions team on, so that they understand kind of what they're asking for and why. And sometimes, if we're buying an asset that doesn't meet a benchmarking threshold or isn't located in a market with a mandatory energy disclosure or benchmarking disclosure law, it's okay that we don't get that information. In terms of PCA firm engagement, Glenn, I'd be curious what you think here, but for me, I found that it's important for them to understand our high-level goals. For example, are we trying to determine the cost of a LEED certification, or are we just trying to figure out, how relatively energy efficient the building is? Some specific things that I've been asking for recently on most deals are number of meters, for example. Because we do so much reporting, utility bill data management is important to me, and the cost of that is really based on the number of meters. So that's an example of something that I have to ask for in most of our deals. But really working with the team to talk about both the scope and the presentation of the information. Do we want to complete a full lead gap analysis? Do we want to do an ASHRAE level 1 or 2 audit? Or maybe we should just have an energy and sustainability section in the PCA. The other thing that I'll add here is that you know, we've talked about timing and the fact that there's typically not much time for these studies. One other thing that we've done is kind of issued a draft study during the due diligence process and then finalizing that study after the deal closes. That's just been a way to get whatever information we can in the beginning, but also kind of complete our analysis a little bit outside of the transaction process. The standard requests and templates, these have really become a go-to resource for our team. There's a lot of information out there, PCA, equipment list, you know, all types of studies. But I found that a lot of it is just too much information for a property manager or an asset manager to dig up on a day-to-day basis. In some cases, you know, I've found studies, PCAs that had been sitting on a shelf from a previous owner, and I've been able to take that information and put it in a table or put it in a reference chart. But I found that just, you know, in terms of human nature and things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, I think, you know, keeping things simple and digestible is a good strategy for us. And also dialogue. You know, I think dialogue is really important to get buy-in and make sure that it's budgeted. In my company, we focus a lot on the business plan, and I think that in the past, I've probably been a little too maybe hesitant during the acquisitions process. You know, ultimately, if I've got buy-in for a lead project, then I'm going to recommend that we budget for it. But I think it's good, you know, even just a hallway conversation with the asset manager or the deal leader. I found that that's a really good way just to get a flavor for how we might be approaching a given deal, and I can feel confident in my recommendation. I know we're getting short on time, so I'll try and just move through these pretty quickly. You know, in terms of progress, I feel like we have made a good bit of progress. Just consistency, having a report available for every one of our properties, that makes these reference documents a lot more usable, and it's nice that our properties, you know, now have begun to know that they're there. In terms of focus, you know, at the acquisitions and due diligence process, it's the ideal time for us to gather information and establish a sustainability roadmap. We typically have more funding available for studies, and those studies can help inform what our sustainability strategy is for the property. And so really I think the diligence process is the right time to make those commitments to the investigations and start to form a roadmap. Also empowerment. You know, I think the asset managers, it helps for them to be confident that they're not going rogue by going green or by making an investment in energy efficiency. And so I think that transition meeting in particular has been really helpful for that. And also market evolution. You know, there's been a lot of changes since 2012, and for us it's now it's less common that we buy a building that doesn't have an Energy Star account. I mentioned GBIG and the fact that there's more information out there, more information available. You know, I've done tons of open record requests and gotten copies of audits that were done by a previous owner, and all of that has been really useful for us. And the building, actually, I forgot to talk about a few of the buildings in the pictures. This is a LEED certified building in DC. The LEED certification was underway when we bought the building, and actually in our due diligence it wasn't caught that we were buying renewable energy credits as part of that LEED certification. So that's an example of a lesson learned, something that I'm looking more for now. The RECs ultimately help our GHG impact and are a good thing, but you know, we need to budget for those because there's implication for both LEED certification and our annual GHG reporting. Moving forward, you know, we're really focused on resiliency. We're trying different things depending on the geography, but we've looked more at air quality, for example, flood risk, storm risk. I talked about the increased availability of data. increased dialogue. You know, I want to make sure that they understand my role and that I'm here to support them and help with strategy. But ultimately, everything happens at the property level. They're the ones that are getting projects implemented, and my job is to make them look good as far as I'm concerned. And all of these laws, these disclosure regulations, in my opinion, it really supports the work that we're doing. It supports energy efficiency. The way that I see it is, you know, our investors, our tenants, these governments, you know, people are demanding that we provide this information and this transparency. And so my strategy is to leverage that to get projects implemented and drive efficiency. But at the same time, it's always a balance between these softer kind of roadmap items and a true hard cost budget. You know, oftentimes, as I mentioned, I work with construction engineering to really let them use their expertise to dive into those hard cost items. But then a kind of roadmap item might be something like a LEED certification or focusing on green leasing or doing an audit or a gap analysis, as opposed to something specific like the cost of a plumbing upgrade or a mechanical upgrade that needs to support LEED. That's all that I had, and I think we've got a few minutes left for some questions.
Yep, thank you very much, Becca. So we do have a few minutes here, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So my colleague Megan has a couple questions for us.
Hi everyone, this question is directed for Glenn from Paul. It is asking if you could speak to the demand for green PCAs to date. Approximately what percentage of PCAs include ASHRAE level 1, level 2, etc. And then an additional question is, do you ever use ASTM BEPA?
Yes. Currently, there are very few PCAs that involve energy components. However, we're doing quite a few for agencies such as housing developments. We're doing green P&As. We're doing a lot of RAD PCAs for them. Fannie has a high performance building module that we add on. So we're doing quite a few energy audits, energy level 2 audits for Fannie Mae. And as far as BEPA is a standard. So when we actually do the ASHRAE level 2 to the BEPA standards, we are actually performing a building energy performance assessment, which is basically a PCA combined with an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit.
Okay, great, thank you. This question is for Becca. Do you have a standard template for scope that include energy, or that includes efficiency and or green assessments?
Yes, that is something that we had kind of a standard scope that we were using for a while, and more recently that's something that Verdani Partners has helped us to implement into our due diligence procedures for new acquisitions. You know, I don't think that each of those components is appropriate for every deal, and so I've kind of inserted myself as like a first stop checkpoint to help figure out, you know, what components are appropriate for a given deal.
Great, thank you. And this is a clarification on a stat that Glenn used. Someone asked, where does the every dollar spent yield $6 in savings statistic come from?
That comes from an article that was written by EPA.
Okay, great. This is also for Glenn. Can you address whether rapid building assessments are being used in place of ASHRAE level 1 or level 2 audits?
I don't believe they're being used in place of level 1 or level 2 audits. I would kind of classify them as an ASHRAE level 1.
Great, thank you. And I guess this is a question open to all. It's a question about the connection between energy and moisture flow. Given that there's inherent physics connection between those two, have we or should we be collecting conditions information on moisture management and problems in existing buildings as part of the green conditions assessment?
We haven't been doing that, but that would be part of the ASHRAE Level 2 as an option. It's not included in the ASHRAE Level 2 guidelines. It's part of the O&M portion, so it would be, yes, it would be beneficial.
Thanks, Glenn. I agree.
Okay, and this question is for Becca. How has Jamestown incorporated benchmarking data into its decision making, and how important do you think this data will be in the future as it becomes more widely available?
That's a good question. A lot of it relates to the timing of the data. For us, we can use the benchmarking data to help identify where the largest energy efficiency opportunities might be. So it's a way to help us kind of strategically focus our efforts. It's also a way just internally to promote a little friendly competition between our buildings. I think most of us have probably heard the phrase, you can't manage what you don't measure. We've been measuring since 2012, but really 2014 was the first year that we felt really confident in our data. And so moving forward, we'll continue to find ways to kind of use that information for decision making. The other thing that's a kind of an interesting nuance to point out is that most of the reporting that I'm obligated to do is on behalf of it's whole building aggregate data, so it includes the tenant consumption. And just the point there is that of that total consumption, the landlord might only pay or be responsible for a portion of that consumption. And so the conversation gets pretty interesting, and it's pretty asset specific. But you know, in terms of data, the more data the better, and the more granular you can get, as long as that's balanced with the cost of getting that more granular data, I think the more strategic you can be.
Okay, and we have one question for Lenny. Does this commercial energy data get into area MLSs?
So as far as I know, MLSs are usually, the majority of the listings are single family. I think they do have a few multifamily listings and maybe commercial. My guess would be no, but I can follow up with you after this. So thank you everybody for joining. It's 3 o'clock now. As I mentioned before, the slides will be available after the webinar, as well as the recording. And Glenn and Becca, thank you both for joining us today. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.